in the Bible, God says, I wrote it over 3,000 times. And the fact that Daniel lived and God used Daniel to write this book that we have in our hands, it's disputed. The book of Daniel, the book of Isaiah are the two most picked at books in the Bible. And I think as we go through, we'll understand why better. But people ultimately refuse to accept the fact that God wrote the Bible and that he can say some things that are going to happen and he can make those things happen just like he said he would. So I want to do a real quick review, and an overview, not a review, overview. So I left the answers there. So there's how many chapters in the book of Daniel?
12.
And there is a clear division in the book of Daniel in those 12 chapters. And 1 through 6 are Hey. 1 through 6 are history, and 7 through 12 are prophecy. So it's like 50% of the book is prophecy. Okay? You can see, so each chapter starts out and it says, in the something year of the reign of so-and-so. So we have time written down over and over again. So if you looked at that's the correct order. If you're going to plug in the chapters, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, then 7 and 8, 5, 9, 6, 10 through 12. So that's actually in chronological order of those chapters. There is a language division which the book of Esther, Nehemiah has also 2 languages in that book. No, I lied. Forget Ezra, forget Nehemiah. Let's go with Ezra instead of Esther, okay? But there's 2 languages in Ezra too. And people don't question that, but they look at the book of Daniel and go and try to find anything and everything they can to pick it apart. And so we do have 2 different languages. You can see that chapters 1 through 2-3 are in Hebrew. Then 2-4 through the end of chapter 7 are in Aramaic, and chapters 8 through 12 are written in Hebrew. Why do you think, and this is just shot in the dark maybe, but why do you think 2 different languages? Why was the book written in 2 different languages?
I'm just going to guess.
Wrong.
Because Daniel had maybe he had an Aramaic background, and then he was trained in something else in Babylon.
Okay.
Or Hebrew. He
Okay.
was trained in Aramaic in Babylon.
One or the other.
Okay, so he would have been trained in Hebrew because he grew up.
Yeah.
He would have been 15 to 18 years old, growing up in Israel. Okay, and he would have learned Hebrew. But the language of the general language of people was Aramaic. It was also the language that was spoken in Babylon. So, and it kind of pertains to, like, the chapter 2 through chapter 7 is God's program for the Gentiles. Remember when we talked about prophecy, there are 4 things about prophecy: the first coming, the second coming, and what other things surround prophecy. And we're going to see that play out today in this lesson. Any guesses? The nation of Israel and the nations that affect Israel. And that's most likely the reason the language variation. It has something to do with the Gentiles and the Jews and the impact of what's going on in the world during those time frames. Okay? Turn with me to Daniel 4, 34b. This is Nebuchadnezzar talking. We're going to actually get to this chapter. We're going to try to do 3 and 4 next week. We're going to get to this chapter. This is Nebuchadnezzar talking, and he is declaring something about God. And this truly is the theme of the book of Daniel. So would somebody read that?
At the end of, I'm just going to read the whole thing because I don't know where B is.
Okay, that's all right.
At the end of that time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?"
Okay, so from those two verses, what would you say is the overarching theme of the book of Daniel?
The dominion of God.
The what? Yep. So the book of Daniel is going to show us over and over and over again that God is in control. God is in charge. God is in control. Okay, we're going to go ahead and we're going to kind of skim over the surface of chapter 1 because we got to dig into chapter 2. That's the first place we're going to find prophecy in this book, and I want to be able to spend the time there. But what's interesting about this book too, even when we go through the history, there are some really amazing things that we can read that God touches on in each one of these chapters that it's important for us to know. So before we get into the chapter, and I'm going to ask somebody if you can give me just kind of an overview of what happened, but I'd like to look at Daniel 1:1, and I'd like to read that, and we're looking for a time phrase. There's a lot of time phrases in this book, okay? And then we're also going to compare that to Jeremiah 25:1, and we're going to have a discussion about that. So with Daniel 1:1, will you give me the time phrase in Daniel 1:1?
In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah.
Okay, there's a time phrase. Now somebody jumped to 25:1, and there's a time phrase there. What is the time phrase?
So where, I'm sorry?
Jeremiah 25:1.
The word came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. That was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon.
Okay, so Jeremiah says it's the 4th year, and Daniel says it's the 3rd year. And so anytime they come across people with higher criticism, they're going to go, see, there's an error there. Does anybody have any idea what would make those two not disagree with each other?
Where they started their year, I guess.
It is the way they started their year. In Babylon, they didn't count the first year. It's the session year. They didn't count that as part of the year. So it would be his 3rd year in Babylon. But in Israel, they counted even if it's a portion of that year as a year. So there's the 4 years, which Jeremiah talked about. Daniel's in Babylon. He's writing in Babylon. It makes sense that he would use their timing. And so he says it's 3 years. Okay, so before we look up a couple of these verses, would somebody like to kind of give me a general overview, or us, a general overview of what chapter 1 is about?
It's about Daniel being educated and kind of the trials and tribulations that he's afforded in, like the food that he eats and how he lives, basically.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Daniel and his 3 friends and probably other unnamed people were taken into Babylon, and they were put into school. Okay? So
And how his faith, he dealt with all of that.
okay? Okay, so let's look at, we're not going to look up every verse. We want to have that understanding. This is our introduction to his first year, couple of years in Babylon. And so we want to learn some things about God in the following verses, and they really do tie into the theme that we just read in Daniel 4 of God is in control. So would somebody read Daniel 1:1 and 2?
In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God.
Okay, and then by implication, or in 3, who else did go into captivity? Or did Neb take? Who else did he take in verse 3?
Some of the sons of Israel.
Yep, including some of the royal family. So that's the picture, and we want to understand, so we know what went. Right, from these first 2 verses, what went to Babylon?
Some of the houses, like the holy implements that were in the temple.
Yep. Some of the
Yeah.
vessels from the temple.
Where they went, or?
Well, there's a really important phrase, and it's, what did God do? Let me ask it that way.
Gave it into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, God gave the king, the kingdom, the vessels into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. And we've looked at why that happened, but what is the point of God giving those things into Nebuchadnezzar's hand?
Well, basically because of the Hebrews' lack of faith or the way they were worshiping, it might as well be with Nebuchadnezzar anyway.
True.
And they weren't really respecting it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
but those implements are not necessarily where God lived, but it was representation of God to the Hebrews at that time, like the elements of the temple.
And they were a big deal, and they were considered holy because the priests did not cut stuff up in the temple and then take it home and use it to cut his food with.
Right.
Because they were only used for that purpose, and they were set apart for God. Okay? But clearly, if God gave the king, the vessels, the youth into Nebuchadnezzar's hands, what's the statement about God?
He's in control.
Yeah, he is. Well, you don't put a question mark on the end of it. Yeah. God's in control.
And he also, in another chapter, maybe it was Jeremiah, dubbed Nebuchadnezzar as his servant.
Yes, he did, and it was Jeremiah. Okay, so, let's read Daniel 1:9, and let's see what we can find out about Daniel. And this has to do with, as Elaine just said a second ago, his diet, which he found as like, I can't eat their food, okay? And so what does God do in the middle of that, in 1:9?
Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials.
Okay, so what do we find out about God there?
So even though Daniel was captured and taken to Babylon, God still found favor with him while he was in captivity by the chief of well, mine says chief of the eunuchs.
Ashpenaz.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Found favor and goodwill of that guy. So
Okay,
basically
so-
he's in charge of everybody that's in charge of the prisoners.
So here God gives them over to Nebuchadnezzar, and here we find out, why is this important when we think about this? Why is it important to know that God granted Daniel favor?
Even when it seems like he's gone, all hope's lost, he's still present.
Okay. God was,
And he still loved them.
Yeah.
And Daniel was adhering to his faith.
yes, he was. Okay, and we'll look at that in just a second. But we certainly see that just because he did this does not mean that he wasn't completely involved and engaged in their lives.
He didn't turn his back on.
He did not. He absolutely did not. And that's comforting. It's comforting for us to know that. Why is that comforting for us to know that?
we don't control God's love through obedience or disobedience. It's who He is.
Okay,
We're the ones that turn away from God. God
Yeah.
does not turn away from us.
okay. And it's so encouraging, especially sometimes we can forget when we're going through challenging circumstances, God is engaged. He's involved. And He's putting compassion and love on Daniel.
I have a really random question. Back on them being taken, the sons being taken in captivity.
Yeah.
Just, I don't, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but what would be the intention there? Is because the royal bloodline was valued so much historically, or is there strategy there? Where they felt they could use the sons as bartering tools potentially? Do you have any?
No, not
Why
as
would
a
they keep
bartering.
them? Why would they keep them?
Well, they took them because these, just like taking the vessels to their temple,
Yeah.
I mean, that's like a prize. So
So it's-
now they're taking, again, we're talking about, yeah, it's
Okay.
spoils of war, that's exact,
Okay.
and these are not, these are from the royal family, these are, you know, they got lineage or whatever.
Okay.
And so we have that, but also the line of Judah is significant too, because Jesus came through Judah. Whether they knew that or understood that, we know that.
Well, Nebuchadnezzar probably took them and the vessels so that he could have control over them and watch over them.
Yep.
And so there wouldn't be, rise up as insurgents back in that country.
Yeah, and wouldn't that be a great reminder if you know, if Elaine worked for me and I took her hostage, wouldn't that be a great reminder between us? It's like, man, I control
Yeah,
the
that
thing,
you got
right?
control.
I've got control, right?
Would
Yeah.
y'all both be coming to class together still?
Well, probably not.
One has a ball and chain.
Okay, let's look at 1:17. Let's read Daniel 1:17.
As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams.
Okay, so what do we find that God gave them? In captivity, doesn't matter, what did God give them?
Wisdom, knowledge,
Understanding.
And what else does he add?
Literature and writing.
Okay,
And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds.
yep. Okay, what does that show us about God's involvement, interaction with them in captivity?
he's still present and active.
Okay, he is still involved, he's still active. And if he gave these abilities, what does that also tell us?
Plans to use them.
Just, it didn't matter where they were. God was still had his plan. He was still working out that plan. And he was giving them, he was gifting them to be able to be what they needed to be. And specifically here, what do we see? If you can't read that, I'm sorry. But what do we see about Daniel here? What was specifically, does he make a point about telling us about Daniel? And Daniel telling us about him.
Dreams and
He
visions.
could understand his dreams.
So this was a unique part of God's plan for his life. And 50% of what he wrote down was that. Dreams and visions. Yes, John?
You know, it said God gave them this knowledge and intelligence. You have to keep in mind, these people were Jews and their basic language was Hebrew. And when they came over there, they had to start learning the Aramaic.
Right.
And convert over to that, and they, in order to learn the knowledge and intelligence of that kingdom, of Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom.
And that's a good introduction to, let's go back and read verses 3 through 5. Because that's exactly what they're talking about. What does 1, 3 through 5 tell us?
Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had the ability for serving in the king's court, and he ordered him to teach the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's present or personal service.
Okay, because of what we just read in verse 17, we know the intelligence, the wisdom, the understanding they had. What do we know about that?
It's given to it by God.
It is given to them by God. It was not of themselves. We also found out in here they went to school. And how long did they go to school?
3 years.
3 years. And why would they go to school for 3 years? It would, part of it would be necessity to serve, but what else? Why would they go to school for 3 years?
To learn the language so they could interact with the king
Yep,
or in his court.
yep.
To become immersed in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely, to immerse them into the culture. That would be part of that goal. And then in verse 7 we would see, I don't know if I wrote that down, but in verse 7 we would see what happened to them. What do we see in verse 7? Also happened to them during that time frame.
Got new names.
Yeah, they're all given new names. I find it funny. Daniel had one too, but we never remember Daniel's, but we always remember those 3 guys, right? Yeah, it was. Okay, so the one thing that Daniel objected to in all of this, it's interesting because they're trying to just press him in to become a Babylonian. And he's not struggling with that. But what is he struggling with in verse 8?
The food they're eating.
The food and the wine.
Yeah, the food and the wine. That's what he's struggling with. Okay? And so why would he be struggling with the food and the wine?
Idolatry.
Could be.
Because it's not up to their standards that they have to have for Jewish regulations. Keeping law.
Okay, we aren't going to take the time to go look, but Deuteronomy is right there. Deuteronomy 14, 2 through 18. It's basically, and we could go to Leviticus, everybody's favorite book to read. We could go there and we could find out another list, and these are dietary laws. And at the end of the day, what God said, you guys are supposed to be so holy, so set apart, that even what you eat is going to set you apart from the people you live with. And with idolatry being in the background in their history, a lot of this food was offered to idols before they sat down and ate it. So you've got those factors playing into Daniel's reason, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take that seriously. So turn with me to, okay, he purposed not to defile himself. Where is that in verse 8? That's how verse 8 starts, right? Okay, so he purposed not to defile himself. And Daniel sought permission from 2 different people that were in charge of him. What does this show us about Daniel? He knew it was wrong. He knew he couldn't do that. He doesn't have much control. He's got somebody in charge of him, and somebody in charge of that person, and ultimately the king. So why would he go to 2 different people to try to basically negotiate eating fruits and vegetables?
It's honest.
Okay, it's honest.
Steadfast in his faith.
Okay, it shows that he took his faith seriously. And he's 15 to 17, and it triggers back in my mind when I think about that to Josiah, which we talked about last week. And what did Josiah do for the nation of Judah?
He read the books to them.
Yeah, they'd lost the Bible in church, okay? They found the Bible in church, and Josiah said, oh no, God is really mad at us. And so he read, what? Go ahead.
The book of law, the 5 books.
5 books, yep.
To them. I
To
don't know if
who?
he did. To all of the people.
All the people. And who would have been in that, all of the people?
At least his parents.
Most likely his parents. And his parents, along with Josiah, took where they were as a nation very seriously and repented and moved forward in a different way. And so we can see his heritage comes from Josiah, and his seriousness about his faith came from Josiah's leadership as the king. His son was Jehoiakim, by the way, and Jehoiakim said, "It's not following you, Dad. No way." Okay. So, is this the first test? So it is a priority of what? What's a priority? That test of food. It's a test of what?
Faith.
We've said faith. That's
Oh.
true.
Obedience?
And obedience, both. And do we find ourselves in life being tested? Our
God
faith being
tested this faith because the people then didn't understand why he was defying, saying not to eat certain foods
Right.
and stuff. Nowadays we understand
Right.
what that is. I mean, the way they processed food and stuff back then, there was lots of parasites
Right.
and all kinds of things in it.
Right? But Daniel knew, he himself knew why he was making that choice.
He was doing it because of his faith in
Right.
God, not because of scientific knowledge.
Right. It was totally based on obeying God, knowing what God said,
Yeah,
and
even though it didn't make sense to
yes,
him,
okay,
it made sense in his heart because
Okay.
it was what God told him to do.
okay. So think about, we've just had, there's a few verses here in chapter 1. Is that the first test of Daniel's faith about the food? Is that the first test?
Being taken captive would be a test of faith, would it not?
Would it not?
Yeah.
And God gave, and God gave,
Yeah.
and now I'm here. And
So
if
he's
you
still
need-
loyal, is what you're getting
Yeah.
at, yeah.
is that he faced that test. And what is the test of faith there? What is the test? Let's describe what that is in a couple of words so that we can think about that a little bit.
Rather than going with the crowd, he was gonna stay on the narrow path.
Okay, that is true. And he was committed to that path.
I think, and maybe this is not the same as a test, but having to learn all the stuff that he was forced to learn, he kind of probably figured out that a lot of that was in opposition to everything that he believed in his
Okay,
faith.
that's a good point too.
So I have another thought too. I think the more and more, because I've not walked the perfect path for sure, but the more and more I lean into God in my life and I trust God, you realize there are no other alternatives. So it's not even necessarily a test of faith. I'm not saying that it wasn't. I'm just saying that also shows his relationship with God. And I'm just saying, like, the closer you are, the more you, the more reliant, dependent you are on God. It's just like
There you
there's
go.
no other choice.
There you go.
It's a given.
It's everything. Yeah,
It's everything. And that's exactly what we're seeing without those words being used
Yeah.
in this chapter. And clearly his relationship with God. You say jump, God, and I say how high. And you see that, and that meant everything to him. Okay? And we see that dependence. Somebody told me I had to live in a foreign land my entire life. There's no record that he ever left Babylon and went back to Jerusalem. He would have been about 85 to 90 at that point in time where they were allowed to go home. So there's no evidence that he didn't just stay there at his age. And to have that single focus on God, this is your plan, this is what you're doing with me, I'm good with it, I'm okay with it, and I'm engaged with you in your plan. Very different than maybe what he would have thought his life plan would have been. Okay, so let's look at 19 and 20 and let's see how did Nebuchadnezzar describe these guys after school.
The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus.
Okay, so there we do have the time frame. So after he interviewed him, he talked to him, they've been prepared to work for him, and this is what he found out about them. Now think about that, being in a foreign land, in a foreign culture, with all these things that are being thrown at them, and yet the result is what they were better. And that tells us something about their attitudes toward what God was doing with their life. What does it tell us?
Totally submissive.
Okay? They were better and they weren't bitter. They were better. Let's look at Daniel 12:3, and then we're going to go on to chapter 2. But I'd like somebody to read Daniel 12:3.
And those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever.
Over and over again we hear about God gave them wisdom and intelligence and intellect, and Neb looks at him and talks to him, and he's there, and you go, man, you guys are 10 times better than everybody else. And what do we find out is the result of that according to Daniel 12:3.
Result of their insightfulness of the Lord.
Okay? That relationship with God shines through. May not always know what it is, why it is, but clearly Nebuchadnezzar saw it, and God tells Daniel that people with insight and wisdom will shine like the stars. Because God's in it. And the relationship is real in it. Just a side note, so, and we're going to see that here in this next chapter. So these guys, when they joined the service of Nebuchadnezzar, they were considered wise men. And so they were considered wise men just like a guy that grew up there and was chosen for that position. Okay? So have you ever thought about why did the wise men come from the east when Jesus was born? It's a strong possibility in his engaging them that the things that he told them about in the future, and they went to check it
Whoa.
out. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Hmm.
It's the only thing we can come up from the Bible that would make that connection, because he was a wise man too. Okay, let's turn to Daniel chapter 2. In this chapter, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he wanted his wise men to tell him two things. What did he want his wise men to tell him?
What he dreamed and what it meant.
What he dreamed and what it meant. And they told him, no way, Jose, it's not possible. And let's look at how they respond in Daniel chapter 2, 10 through 11. It shows what their religion is.
The astrologers answered the king, there is no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans.
Okay, so what is their religion? What are they teaching us about their belief system in those two verses?
Monotheism, distant gods that are not relatable to humans.
Okay, exactly. And they don't talk to people. And that's already a contrast to what we just looked at in Daniel chapter 1. Okay, so they go, so if they can't, by the way, there's a little caveat in there. If they can't tell the dream and what it meant, what was the result going to be? Does anybody know?
Throw him in the fire.
They're going to kill him.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the wise guys. So that would include Daniel and his 3 friends, because they're part of that group. Okay, so that's the situation they're in. And so once Daniel finds out, and they actually knock on his door to take his life. Once he finds out, then he goes to the king and asks for some time. And let's read 17 and 18 and see what God does, or what Daniel does with his time.
Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah about the matter, in order that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends might not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. They went to God.
They went to God. They went to God. And they're going to God when their life is on the line, continues to reinforce what to us?
They never lost their faith.
They never lost their faith. They believed that God was involved in their circumstances. And what else?
I think they believed that God would reveal to him what the dream was.
And they were, I mean, they're all in, 100% all in, right? There's no other alternative. There's nobody's going to show up and save the day. It's just God shows up and saves the day, or they're dead. That's the situation that they're in. Okay, how does God respond in Daniel 2:19?
Gave him a vision.
He
Yeah.
revealed it to him.
He told him the dream. He told him what it meant. Okay? And let's look at, he goes into, well, let's look at Daniel's response, because his response is really coming out of his relationship with God. And in 2:20 through 23, how does Daniel respond to God answering their prayer?
He praises him.
And his praise is specific. What kind of things does he tell God that he's recognizing?
Wisdom and power.
That he's in control of everything, he knows everything, and his will is in everything.
Okay? So he's really highlighting God's control, his will, his ability. Anything else?
He's kind of an acknowledgement that God put him there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, right? When you think about maybe not being the best situation in all
Yeah.
of this.
And I think that the next couple of verses are actually going to support that too, Austin. So he takes the time to, and he gives God complete credit for the situation that he's in. So let's read 27 through 30, and let's look at the introduction. So he's in front of Nebuchadnezzar. He's got the answer. He's got a great introduction for Nebuchadnezzar before he tells him what the dream was and what it means. What is that? In 27 through 30.
Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, "The secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals his secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in latter days." Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what will come to pass after this. And he who reveals the secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who have made known the interpretation of the king.
Okay, there's two things I want to pull out of there. One is Daniel's, like, it's almost like he's got him, so he's just purposefully, intentionally, he wants to know what the dream is, he wants to know, but he's using this moment, he's not letting it pass by, to tell him two things, really. And what are those two things that he's not letting this moment pass by?
He introduces him to God.
Yes, he does.
And actually explains to him that it's God,
Yes,
not him.
yes, and so we see that, what attitude in Daniel as he communicates to the king? What is that attitude?
Gives God all the credit.
Yeah, gives God all the credit. He knows his place. God's God, he's the servant. Okay, and then it's also interesting that a couple of times in these 3 verses, he talks to Nebuchadnezzar about what God wants him, what is it? I'm gonna ask that question. He talks to Nebuchadnezzar about God. What is he saying, and about specifically God and Nebuchadnezzar? What do we see?
That God even knows the thoughts of Nebuchadnezzar and what the feeling of his heart is.
He
as
does.
He knows everybody else's.
Yep, he does.
I think he's trying to impress upon Nebuchadnezzar how important it is for God to tell Nebuchadnezzar.
God wanted Nebuchadnezzar to know. He wanted him to know. He was part of this. And he wanted him to know. And he wanted Daniel to tell him, God wants you to know. And that will be interesting as we look at more of his life, Nebuchadnezzar's life, next week. Okay, we're going to read 31 through 35. And Daniel is going to tell Nebuchadnezzar the dream. What do we see in 31 through 35?
In your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge shining statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. The head of the statue was made of fine gold. Its chest and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were bronze. Its legs were iron, and its feet were a combination of iron and baked clay. As you watched, a rock was cut from a mountain, but not by human hands. It struck the feet of iron and clay, smashing them to bits. The whole statue was crushed into small pieces of iron, clay, bronze, silver, and gold. Then the wind blew them away without a trace, like chaff on a threshing floor. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth.
Okay, so you've got a picture of a statue on one of those pages. If you want to look at it, if you want to write on it, that's fine. You don't have to, but you've got a picture of a statue. So when he's looking, he divides this statue, okay? And we're going to look at that. He just did. But he's going to divide it even clearer as he tells Nebuchadnezzar what it means. And so we want to read, let's read 36. And this is where he says, I'm going to tell you the interpretation. Let's read 36 through 38. Let's see what the head is.
This was the dream. Now we shall tell its interpretation before the king. You are, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, are the beasts of the field or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold.
Okay, so he tells him he's the head of gold, so there's no doubt about that, but he also tells him clearly what else?
That God gave him.
That God gave it to him. We continue to see God's control being expressed here. And he tells him that before he tells him, you are the head of gold. Okay, then let's read verse 39. And what do we see in verse 39?
And after you there will arise another kingdom inferior to you, then another third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth.
Okay, so what is clear as Daniel's writing, talking to Nebuchadnezzar, he is separating out the statue, right? And so we see the head of gold, that's you, Neb, that's you. And a king and a country or a kingdom are interchangeable, okay? So Neb, that's Babylon, Neb, that's you, okay? Then he goes on, and where's the next division that he brings up? In verse 39.
The silver.
Okay? And after you, and you're relating, okay, so you see the 32, you're comparing 32
Hmm.
to 39. So, and what do we find out that the next metal of the statue is? And you said it.
Silver.
Yeah, it's the silver. And so, and he says that is another kingdom, okay? So he defines that there. Then there's another break, and look at the end of 39, what do we see?
The bronze.
The bronze, the third kingdom.
Yeah, there's a third kingdom. So we've got the first kingdom, the second kingdom, the third kingdom, and it's bronze, and they're gonna rule, they're gonna have worldwide rule, okay? So let's look at let's read 40 through 43.
Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. And in that you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with the common clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw that the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery.
Okay, so as he's described the separation, the kingdoms on this statue, which one has he put more emphasis on?
The clay and iron.
Okay, all right, the fourth kingdom. Yeah, there's verses where there's just one verse that describes two kingdoms in the same verse, okay? In verse 44, we're gonna see more understanding about what is happening. So let's start with, and just read that first line of verse 44. What are we told?
And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed.
Okay, when he says the days of those kings, what is he talking about?
The kings that preceded
Yeah. The kings after
this.
the
The silver king, the bronze king.
Okay? Look at verse 41. Okay? Well, no, let's go back. Go back and look at,
There's 5
start with 34. Go back and look at 34, and let's read 34. (33) and 34, sorry. Would somebody do that?
Which one?
33 and 34.
Its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them.
Okay, so he's drawing Daniel's attention, or Daniel's drawing Nebuchadnezzar's attention to a part of the dream. And what is that part based on 32, 3, and 34?
The stone that makes the last kingdom break apart.
Okay,
That crushed all the pieces.
and where does that stone strike the statue? At the feet.
Yeah.
Okay? Alright, so take those ideas, now go over to 42, 43, and just stop, and in the days of those kings. So somebody read 42, 43, and then just that first line of 44.
As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay in the time of those kings.
Okay? So then when he says, in the days of those kings, what's he referring to in verse 44?
Return of Christ.
He is returning the return of Christ. That is absolutely true.
The my
And we-
notation in my study Bible says
Don't be
that-
cheating on me, go ahead, Tom.
Hey, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
It is a reference to the future millennial kingdom of Christ.
That's what is gonna be set up, and it is gonna be Jesus that puts an end to rulers, worldwide rulers on this planet. But it's significant about where the stone strikes the statue.
It strikes at the feet.
At the
because
feet.
That's regardless of all the glory and gold and silver and everything above.
Yep.
That, the feet are the foundation, what
Okay.
holds it up. You crush that and all the rest of it comes down.
Okay, that's true.
So is it referencing the kings before Nebuchadnezzar?
It is not.
It is
Because
not.
it's striking it on the toes, okay? That Jesus is the stone striking the statue on the toes. And how do we know that it's Jesus? How do we know that?
Because the stone becomes a mountain which covers the entire earth.
Okay.
And that's
And it reigns forever and ever.
And it reigns forever and
And it
ever.
reigns
So we know the
forever.
end. We know that that's exactly what's happening, no matter what's going on. It's Jesus that's going to put an end to world rule. Okay?
So what
But-
we're talking about is the kingdoms that are iron and clay that don't mix, and they're always fragmenting and arguing, not sticking together.
Okay, but look at verse 42. He describes a part of that statue that is significant. What is it? Toes. How many toes do we have? 10 toes.
Depends on how you were born,
Okay, it does depend
or how you
Well-
lived your life.
Right?
If you
Okay.
had an accident or two or not.
Okay, so we know.
Standard, generality.
Exactly. Okay, so we know
Yeah.
that Jesus' return is going to be to strike the statue on the feet and the toes. We know that. And he makes a point to mention the toes. And then he says in verse 44, read that again.
In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever.
Okay? So in the days of those kings, what kings?
The kings before Christ's coming.
Yeah, but Christ put an end to world rule by striking the statue on where?
So,
Toes, the feet and the toes. In the days of those kings. He
The toes
mentions the
kings.
toes, the toes kings.
The
In
days of those kings,
The
yeah.
toes kings, that's right. In the days of those kings, some form of 10 is when Jesus is gonna come back and set up his eternal kingdom. Okay? Alright, so I want you to look at, and we're gonna quit.
Like, so this is, I'm maybe just speculating here, but is this like post-rapture timing?
Is it post-rapture timing? There is no prophetic event that we're told has to take place for the rapture to happen. So, as we look at other things, we can certainly go, and we need to look at other things before we answer that.
Sure.
That's a good question.
Cause it's also, this question of carving out of the rock. Like what that, you know what I mean? Yeah, anyway, I'm sure.
Well, and we know that rock, we do know that rock is Jesus returning because he says, I'm setting up my kingdom and it's forever. So
Just
that's really clear to us.
I'm just looking at your sheet and thinking about like what the time frame is of this feet and toes piece. I mean, obviously we don't know the answer to that, but I'm just.
And we're
I'm
gonna
thinking
find,
of
I'm sorry,
as much about the beginning of it as I am the end. I guess
Right.
is what I'm getting at. Is
Okay.
whether we're in it or it's yet to come.
I think as we keep going, we're gonna have a better idea. And we're also gonna find that those 10 toes are described in a different way in another chapter in Daniel. We're gonna find that John had something to say about it in Revelation. And so that's, we'll be doing that as we continue to go by. I would like you to flip this over to the kingdoms. So historically, and we have the benefit of history, he was writing 600 years before the birth of Christ. And we have the benefit of history. We know that Babylon is the head of gold because, how do we know that?
He told him that.
He told him.
Okay, yep, and then we can look at the breast of arms and silver, the Medes and the Persians conquered Babylon, okay? And the silver was part of what they used in their kingdoms. And then, who conquered, the Medes and the Persians?
The Greeks,
The Greeks. And then who conquered the Greeks?
the Romans.
Romans, okay? And I'm not asking you to take me at face value for this, well, I
We
am
never do.
for right now, but we're gonna continue to look at this. Now, why, I mean, to us, really, Rome's history, Babylon's ancient history, Medes and the Persians are ancient history, Greece. Why would this matter to us? And why would this be important when it comes to prophecy?
It has to line up with our reality, historically
Okay?
and currently.
Because it's continuing. This whole thing that Daniel's talking about here, the deal about the toes breaking and everything, that is an ongoing sequence.
Okay, it is ongoing sequence, but if the statue is this, the silver is the Medes and Persians, the bronze is the Greeks, and the iron is Rome, think about who, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but historically, between 605 BC and the time of Christ, who was in charge of the nation of Israel?
Romans.
All of these countries.
Yeah. I mean, the Romans were the last ones.
Yeah, they were the last ones, but each one of these countries, and a prophecy covers 4 things, each one of these countries had control of Israel, and then, before Rome went off the scene, and we've said this in here, what about Israel for 1900 years? It didn't exist.
Just got
So we've got this history, and during this time frame, Rome is the one who destroyed the city and the sanctuary in 70 AD. There's no Israel on the map until 1948.
So Rome's number 4,
Yep.
number 5 is the last one.
The number 5 is the final kingdom, and that's Jesus setting up his final kingdom. So if these are historical countries, and we have a chance of looking at some of these in more detail, and also other chapters through Daniel, we'll get a look at more details that will confirm that this is who we're talking about. And if the 5th kingdom is Jesus setting up his eternal kingdom, what does that tell us?
Look up.
Okay, look up. What does that tell us about the statue? That's what I should have said.
Makes it meaningless.
But it's not there anymore.
Okay, that's not.
Scattered in pieces.
But remember, it said, in the days of those kings, the 10 toes, the God of heaven is going to set his kingdom up. Eternal kingdom. What does that tell us?
Where's the other 5?
Huh?
Oh, the-
There's only going to be one more coalition that's going to consist of multiple, not just single, because there's 10 toes. So it's multiple. There's only going to be one more coalition of man before Christ returns.
And that tells us that hasn't happened yet, right?
Yeah.
So we have this in history.
Yeah, because the other piece of that is that Christ's death and resurrection happened during this.
Which, by the way, Daniel talks about. Okay? You're right. So we're seeing historical kingdoms. All of these controlled the nation of Israel, had a huge impact on the nation of Israel. And shortly, I mean, Rome's still in charge, then they destroy Israel, wipe it off the map. It's gone for 2,000 years. And here we are. Part of this is still not fulfilled. Right?
And Israel returning to their home in 1948 was the mark, a significant mark.
Absolutely.
Huge.
For prophecy to take place, that was a significant.
Not that long ago.
Right, it's not. Okay, so that's where we're gonna stop, and then next week we're gonna do 3 and 4. And
So the stone that was cut out is Christ, that was cut out without human hands. And so birth certificate to this?
It just is really just, all we can compare that to like,
Like
The
to
New
beginning
Testament?
of the setting up of the kingdom?
but we can compare it to the New Testament where Jesus returns. And we know in places in the Old Testament where Jesus returns, Zechariah says he's gonna stand on the Mount of Olives. And so, and then he's gonna set up, Revelation 19 says he's returning. And then, so we see that he's going to do that, but the events on the earth is there's gonna be some coalition of 10, and he's gonna take that leadership, that kingdom, whatever you wanna call it.
Can I ask another silly question? The rock is described as being carved out. What's it carved from? You know?
We could do some cross references that rocks and God and Jesus are actually, and I'll do that next week. I'll
It says
pull that in.
the Greek version adds from a mountain, the Hebrew lacks that.
Say that again.
It says the Greek version adds that the rock was cut from a mountain, the Hebrew lacks that piece.
Okay, and I'll go back and I'll look at that and we'll look up some verses that apply to that. But we do know, even if we can't figure out everything there, we do know that it's God setting up his eternal kingdom because he tells us that.
What?
Okay, what's also interesting,
We don't know.
I just wanna read you this real quick and then we'll be done. When, at the time that Daniel or Nebuchadnezzar had this vision, the Medes and the Persians were just kind of like warring tribes. At the time that Daniel had this vision, Greece was little city-states. At the time Daniel had this vision, a small city called Rome had just started developing in the world. It's kind of crazy to see all these things and God's in control. And he's moving all the pieces. Just like he said he would. Anybody else?
I just can't help but notice your comment about Daniel and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was, if you kind of keep going, part of the reason we don't remember is, I mean, they mention here and there like Belteshazzar, but
Right?
it's always Daniel.
Right,
But in the first chapter, they call them by their Hebrew names,
right.
and then after that,
They don't.
they don't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of interesting, like why, I don't know.
I guess because it's God's people, right? So they're giving you the setup for their Babylonian exile. Their name's there, but we're interested in God's perspective, maybe. Is that what it is?
I don't know. We don't know, but it is
It's not
interesting.
Belteshazzar in the
Right.
lion's den.
Right?
I could, yeah, I
You're
could-
right, it's not.
It's easier to say Daniel.
I just couldn't help but think about that. as
Yeah.
you were
It's
talking,
interesting.
Since you said that, cause it's
Yeah.
the first time I really paid that much attention to how it changes.
Don't know a lot of guys named Belteshazzar either. It's usually Daniel.
Well, I think it is your middle name,
Wow. It's not my fault you gave birth to me. Jeez. That was all, that's on you.
but. Yeah, right? Okay, would somebody like to close?
Sure, I'll pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day. We thank you, Lord, that you reveal yourself to us in so many ways. We ask that you just help us to look to you for guidance, Lord, to follow, and to just put you out into the world every day. Thank you for all our many blessings. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, guys.
How do you tee that?